is respected in India and beyond, not just for the positions that she has held, but for the strength of the convictions that she has expressed. So we are delighted to welcome her to Harvard, to use her presence at Harvard to celebrate something that was important to me going back to my time as president of the university, the establishment of deep connections between Harvard and South Asia in general and India in particular on issues that range very widely from public health to information technology, and from ancient culture to contemporary international relations. So, Madam Minister, welcome to Harvard. Let me kick this off by asking you, you got to the United States, I believe, about 36 hours ago, and you will be going from here to Washington, where you will be a participant in the G20 meetings. What do you hope to accomplish as a participant in what will be the first G20 meeting that's taken place in a number of years, in a direct, in-person sense rather than virtual?
Well, I think participating in the G20 now, all India has got its own importance. We'll soon be joining, or we have joined, the trio. The trio refers to the president or the chair of the G20 and the one before and one after. We are the one after. Sooner we'll be taking up the G20's chair. And that whole year, India will work to take the G20's agenda forward. And therefore, we are already part of the three, one before and one after the current president. So for me, it will be also a process of learning how the current presidency is taking agenda forward. More importantly, I think the OECD has been working in the much discussed global tax or tax on these huge big multinationals, so that this practice, which is now prevalent, that they end up paying tax nowhere. They're neither paying the country where they're doing business and earning the profit, nor are they paying tax in the country where they are located. So end of the day, the current each country for itself taxation regime has given them an opportunity to end up paying nowhere, which is good for the company, but absolutely of no use for countries where the business is getting generated. I know the Secretary of Treasury in the United States, which Lawrence Summers was once upon a time the Secretary of US Treasury. The current secretary has taken a lot of initiative in having something concluded. Today, more than 134 countries, I think, have come together to have a global tax on all those companies which are operating across nations, making their profit across nations, different profit, different areas, but nevertheless profits in so many geographical jurisdictions, but end up paying no tax in both the jurisdictions. So I will be looking forward to having greater conversation on that in this G20, which happens from now.
What is your, that I think is a very important accomplishment. in the days when I was Treasury Secretary, it was referred to as the tax competition issue, but it was in essence what it is today. Making sure that companies are not able to entirely escape taxation, and also seeking to avoid a ruinous race to the bottom in terms of the effort to collect taxes. How do you see, I know it will figure importantly in the discussions in Washington this week, the current state of the global economy? There are those who are rather encouraged because they see some signs that COVID is in the rear view, moving towards the rear view mirror. There are others who are very much alarmed by inflation prospects, by concerns that progress with respect to COVID is something that's confined to the traditional industrialized world rather than developing countries. How would you assess, coming into these meetings, the state of the global economy?
I don't think you can have one picture for the entire globe. The emerging market economies are likely to recover speedily and are likely to have a growth trajectory which will probably be given the title of engine for growth. They are the ones who are going to be pulling forward the global economy. And in that, at least from the data which has been released yesterday and a week before, I can say that India's growth this year will be the highest in the world, of course, based on a lower base of last year. But that will continue into the next year, and even there, we will be one of the fastest growing economies. And so will some more countries, all of whom are in the emerging market areas. The developed world will also catch up and do, because their base is very high. So the growth that they can show off will not be closer to double digit, but certainly will be also adding to the global growth. So I see differing picture in different regions. But I think one common factor all of us will have to, even if we don't take the pandemic on board, as you said, if it's a matter of the review mirror, climate is one thing which is going to worry all of us equally. Some will have to be bothered much more than the other, because the burden on your development agenda will be disproportionately on the emerging economies. Those countries, particularly the developed countries, who've had a phase in their development when they depended on fossil fuel, but also managed to come out successfully with their development, reaching up to all the people and so on. Today, we'll have to face the hard realities, because the challenges will have to be shared by all. On that, all of us will be on equal footing, but even there, the burden of sharing it will have to be disproportionate again. Even as it stands, it's disproportionate. So vaccination is the one which is going to give the confidence to economies to come out of it faster, and that way, India has been very fortunate.
I think you mentioned last night at dinner that as of some date, perhaps the end of the year, you anticipated that 1 billion people in India.
End of this month.
End of this month.
Yes.
1 billion people will have been vaccinated. That's an extraordinary accomplishment. How has, ask a maybe a slightly tendentious question. Our former colleague, Lance Pritchett, who spent several years as the World Bank's chief economist for India, in India, wrote a paper several years ago called The Flailing State about India, in which he called into question the Indian government's ability to execute on a variety of things. The statistic in the paper that stuck with me was the claim that the absentee rate for teachers on an average day in India was close to 30%. And he drew implications for what that meant for education. How have you managed to get 1 billion jabs into people's arms in what, in the grand scheme of things, has not been a very long time? And I think if I take 1 billion jabs divided by the population of India, that looks pretty good compared to the American vaccination rate. How has your government managed to do this?
Over the decades, I think India has steadily built up this institutional arrangement where even down to the village level, primary health centers exist, and they do take care of, as the name suggests, basic requirements of the fundamental primary care that has to be given to patients in those areas. These centers have, over the years, undertaken those inoculations for newborn children, which have to be given in a periodic interval. Polio vaccination, India has been very successful in containing the polio, spread of polio. And over the years, again, periodic malaria or seasonal illnesses for which doctors are turned to patients in a particular region and so on, have given us the capacity to handle large epidemic proportion illnesses and to treat them. Therefore, I think just as soon as the vaccines became available, our systems were ready to span out, even go to some of the far-flung areas and give the doses to the people. So institutional arrangement in India has always been the framework which has been built over the years. The question in between was, what if the vaccine will have to be preserved in a certain temperature? If the temperature is not suitable for a semi-tropical country like India, it's going to be difficult for people to carry it and move around. Luckily, the 2 vaccinations which we have used are quite amenable to the Indian conditions, and therefore the logistics so required for moving this from one place to another did not pose quite a challenge, and therefore we've been successful at it.
I want to go back for a second to an issue that you raised, which was climate change. How much do you think? Well, I'll ask you this first. Do you feel like the world's on a good track with respect to this problem? I mean, you've certainly done major things with respect to renewable energy in India. Everybody talks about having done very important things. Are you optimistic that the world is going to manage this problem successfully, whether successfully means 1.5 degrees centigrade or 2 degrees centigrade? Or do you feel we still have a long way? Do you feel like we're on a good track with respect to the problem or not?
The concern exists. Almost all countries agree that this is a serious challenge and it has to be addressed immediately. There's no difference on that. But what is the extent to which any country can take this burden on themselves without a global convergence on how to handle it? Global convergence on agreeing to have technology transfer. Global convergence again on how to mitigate the problem as much as adapt the problem. Both mitigation and adaptation are equal in terms of countries prioritizing on how to face the challenge. So on these, more work is got to be done, and I'm sure the COP26 sooner, which is going to be held in Scotland, will address many of these issues.
What are you mentioned last night, and you've mentioned again today, the issue of technology transfer. I understand the issues around financial transfer, but what is the nature of the technologies that you feel would somehow make the situation in India substantially better that aren't being effectively transferred from the West?
Well, one obvious thing is looking at renewable energy. The biggest challenge about renewable energy is not to get the panels or the tidal energy or bringing in wind power or anything, but storing renewable energy is the biggest issue. So if I were to have biggest power generating units, I'm all right up to a point. But if I don't have the capability for storing them, obviously it's going back in terms of the civilization, in that only during daytime will you be with some energy around, and in the nights it's going to have to fade off. You'll have to have a substitute for that, and therefore a hybrid which may or may not be fully climate compatible. So the sooner that countries which can absorb that such technologies for storing power are shared, the better we are going to be. One. The second point is many countries which are facing huge disasters because of cloudbursts, landslides, seawater rising, do not have disaster resilient infrastructure. And if disaster resilient infrastructure is not available, every year you have to rebuild. Every year you're going to put people to inconvenience. And the money will be spent on the same things over and over again without having the cumulative advantage. So again, technology exists for resilient infrastructure to be built. Earthquake, flooding, cloudburst, landslips, everything can be handled if we have such, let's say, infrastructure built which can adapt to these kind of disasters. Technology transfer again. And even that has to happen very quickly so that nations can benefit from it. So technology transfers in so many different ways. I'm not sure transfers are yet beginning to happen.
The area of energy storage, it's a really hard area. A lot of thought has gone into developing better battery technologies and the like. It's my understanding that it is surprising the extent to which, in many contexts, even here at partway through the 21st century, you can't do vastly better than pumping water uphill and then letting water pump downhill. But you keep saying technology transfer. Are there technologies which somehow are very good at energy storage, which are used in the United States, which India is not able to emulate, which India is not able to purchase? Is it really the case that proprietary intellectual property is substantially raising the burden? I mean, I understand those arguments with respect to a variety of pharmaceuticals. I'm a little bit surprised if, with respect to battery technology, India can't purchase state-of-the-art batteries or state-of-the-art electricity storage means.
It may not be completely not able to purchase. It's also a question of exchange of levels of research which prevails in these areas. Also, the shift from hydrogen to ions, various ions, and also looking at the shift itself. How do you do that? What is the process of doing it? So it's not as if there is a technology readily available for me to buy and go build the storage capacity in India. It's also the process through which we are moving. It is an ever shifting area in which better to have shared thoughts with which one can work. And I'm not sure, you're right, I'm not sure if we've reached the stage in terms of storage of batteries to be in a position to buy. But do we at all know that all of us are moving in the right direction? Or are some of us sitting and reinventing the wheel, which is not going to be beneficial to any? So these are the kind of issues on which I think greater transparency will help. But at the moment, I doubt if the conversation is on at all.
There are reports in many countries of much more severe energy shortages than anybody anticipated 3 months ago. And one of the questioners asked a question that was directed at energy shortages in India, greatly reduced inventories of coal, for example. Say something about how you see in the short run the Indian energy situation, and actually rather more generally, what's your expectation of the growth rate of the Indian economy over the next year or so?
First thing on the energy coal shortage and other, about which you briefly, the energy minister, the power minister, is on record only 2 days ago when he said absolutely baseless information is floating around that there's probably shortage of coal, shortage of other inventories, which will lead to a sudden gap in the supply demand situation in the energy consumption. Absolute baseless. There's no shortage of anything. In fact, if I recall the minister's statement, every power producing installation has the next 4 days stock absolutely available within their own premises, and the supply chain has not broken at all. So there's not going to be any deficiencies which may lead to any shortfall of supply. So that takes care of India's power situation. We are now a power surplus country. We are also now taking a fairly good amount of risks to see what the basket of energy is available for India, how much is based on fossil fuel and how much comes from renewable. And we are always looking at ways in which it can be shifted in favor of renewable energy. So the picture is not of short supply, but it's also a picture of newer components into the basket. As regards growth of India, I think in my first intervention itself, I mentioned that we are looking at near close to double-digit growth this year, and this would be the highest in the world. And for the next year, on the basis of this year, your growth would definitely be somewhere in the range of 8 point. This is not my assessment. Ministry of Finance has not done any assessment as yet about the growth number, but World Bank or IMF or any rating agencies have all come nearer this kind of a number. So the next year would also be somewhere in the range of 8 to 9, 7.5 to 8.5 would be the growth. And I expect that to be sustained for the next decade, because the rate at which expansion in core industries are happening, rate at which services are growing, I don't see a reason for India to be anywhere lesser than the next coming decade.
You've sustained growth above 8% is very much a historical rarity. Main examples that come to mind of sustained growth of above 8% for long periods of time are the East Asian miracle countries, Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, and so forth, who based it on having a heavily manufacturing export oriented economy, moving up a value chain from t-shirts to bicycles to motorcycles to cars to planes and the like. And there are other examples. Botswana stands out, of people who had very rapid growth, countries that had very rapid growth, driven heavily by natural resource exports and a limited population. Is India a modern version of the East Asian miracle story? Is India in some way its own new growth paradigm? I think many people feel that China's rapid growth was heavily manufacturing driven, but that China had pretty much saturated the world's ability to take manufacturing exports from Asia. And so there wasn't so much room for India. Say something about, since you referred to growth for a decade, the medium and longer term vision of where that growth is going to come from.
I don't think the growth post the pandemic of any country can be compared with what had happened earlier, prior to the pandemic. The reset which the globe is seeing itself tells you a narrative that the way in which countries are going to plan their growth is going to be very different from what it was earlier. The pandemic itself is one of the reasons, as I just said. The reset happening from certain geographical territories where people are coming out of it, looking for other places where they can run their businesses from, because no longer you have the transparency and the rule of law in certain geographical territories, and therefore industry is the first one to get out. Investments, the first one to get out. And they're looking for destinations where certain assumptions can be taken up. Rule of law, democracy, transparent policies, and assurance that you're in the broad global frame of things and that you're not an outlier. You will not have anything to do with the global scheme of things, then it's no good for us. So all these are extraneous factors which help India to attract industries to come to India, to set businesses there, and to be able to produce for India and for produce in India for export from India. That's one of the things which will tell us that what India will be going through will benefit from this move. The second is India itself is a huge market. You would have had people tell us it's big, population is big, but you don't have a purchasing power capacity, and therefore nothing can be sold to you all, which is globally otherwise wanted. Today, our demographic dividend is not a dividend without reason. It's a dividend which has great purchasing power ability. The middle class in India has the money to buy things. So people who are moving from other destinations to invest in India and to produce in India will have a captive market. Third, the same demographic dividend also gives us another advantage. The youth population of India today is a skilled set of youngsters, skilled in various different areas. You find most of them in STEM, as a result of which many of the areas in which we have opened up investment possibilities, space, atomic sciences, our agriculture sciences, looking at how technology can be used in financial sector, are all areas where your Indian young, not just within India, but even outside, are contributing to the global technology infused businesses. So I think that will also be one of the reasons why India will attract investments and will have the purchasing power to demand best of things from whoever produces it. That's a third. Fourth, irrespective of the fact that globally today people have learned to be more supportive of the local and have few aviation miles for getting a thing from distant area, India is even today best in agriculture. The food security of many countries depend on imported food. Many in the Middle East depend on India for their basic food materials. We'll be one of the largest exporters of food and food processed materials. Equally, labor intensive units, partly skilled labor intensive sectors such as textile, footwear, leather, and certain parts and components for industry are all manufactured in India. So I see every reason to believe that this 7.5 to 8.5 growth is absolutely sustainable for the next decade. These are features which don't exist in any one country all put together. You may have one in one country, another in a different country, but India has it all.
Our primary subject today is economics, but in knowledge of the fact that you were coming, a number of people in our community, notably Amartya Sen, have expressed rather strong reservations about the government of which you were a part and its approach to ethnic issues within India. And there's a feeling that the legacy of tolerance that was an important part of what bound the United States and India together, and certainly that these are areas where we have very serious issues in the United States, but that legacy of tolerance has been very much called into question by your prime minister's past and by some of the statements that have been made by your current home minister and your current government, and that the attitude taken by your government to the Muslim population is something that comes between the United States, given our values of universalism and inclusion, and India. And so I think it's appropriate that is one of many questions that we ask you in the course of a talk like this, that question be put to you on behalf of, I think, a number of people in our community who have it on their
minds. It's one thing to have a view, and totally another to base it on facts. If opinions become my prejudice, there's no way in which I can counter it. I'm sure all of us are familiar with the fact that sometimes it is an effort similar to waking up somebody who's pretending to sleep. If you're genuinely sleeping, I can tap on your shoulder and say, please wake up. But if you're pretending to sleep, will you wake up? You can't, you won't. And I'll be fooling myself thinking I'm waking you up. There are scholars. I respect Dr. Amartya Sen, who you mentioned. I would think for every one of his view, he'd go to India, move freely around, and find out what's happening. That itself would help us to know particularly a scholar, is talking based on facts. In India, law and order is a subject which is each province for its own. So if you were to look at the United States, and if there is one particular state, I don't know, Texas, for instance, if it has a problem, it may not be a problem which the president of the United States will have to deal with, it will be the governor of that state. That is the case even in India. There are provinces which are ruled by not the party to which the prime minister belongs. Even last night, not even day before yesterday night, even last night, in a state which is ruled by, in a state meaning in a province which is ruled by not the party to which prime minister belongs, crimes have taken place, poorest of the poor have been hit, some dead, but even that will be at the doorstep of the prime minister because that suits my narrative. It is not right, because in that state, in that province, law and order is governed by the elected chief minister of that region, who's not even a party man for Prime Minister Modi. I remember in 2014, as soon as the prime minister came to power, there were a series of attacks on churches, places of Christian worship. And there again, there were voices. People returned their awards, the Padma awards that we give in the country, highest civilian awards, or saying this government is against minorities. Look at the way Christians are being treated, churches are being attacked. Every state in which this happened had their own investigation. The committees, the police, and everybody belonged to their respective states. The prime minister had nothing to do with it. You would be surprised to know that every one of these attacks, after proper investigation, proved out to be nothing to do with the prime minister, nothing to do with the BJP, nothing to do with any communal angle. But the blame was put at the prime minister's door. Awards were returned saying, "Oof, it's difficult for me to live in this country. Oh, my minorities are being offended." It turned out that none of them had anything to do with the communal angle, and none of them to do with the BJP or the prime minister. Similar is the way in which this time, after 2019, when Prime Minister Modi came back with even better, stronger mandate, this campaign which is going on to say that there are communal violence, communal whatever, minorities are in difficulty. Again, a question of law and order being a state subject. Each state has its own. In states where parties who care nothing for the BJP, there's been atrocious violence. Is that also something to be answered by the prime minister? And let me come down to a very personal and sort of, you may think it's petty, but I will quote this. Tell me the number of people who have criticized Prime Minister Modi in such derogatory words, calling him names, abusing him. Has any one of them been touched? Have they been questioned? Whereas in non-BJP ruled states, when the chief ministers have been questioned, first thing is to arrest them and put them in jail. I'll name the states where this has happened. In fact, some of them are still languishing in the jail for having spoken ill of a particular elected chief minister who belongs to an opposition party. Would the same set of scholars who are talking about Prime Minister Modi also comment on those states and say, what's happening? India's tolerant culture. No. It's worrying that scholars can be now influenced more by their personal likes and dislikes rather than comment on the basis of facts. It's really worrying that scholars can become imprisoned by their own likes and dislikes rather than be equanimous look at the facts and data before them, and then speak.
Ask you another question if I could, and then I'm going to ask people in the room if they want to answer questions. An interest of mine for a long time, going back to the time when I worked at the World Bank, through my time at Treasury, through work I've done more recently, has been with the role of the international financial institutions, adapting the role of the international financial institutions to respond to the many ways in which the world has changed in the 75 years since they were formed and founded. And I know that India has long been involved in many ways with the World Bank and the IMF, and has had strong views, not always the same as the United States. I'd be interested in any thoughts you have about what, if anything, should be done in this era with respect to the international financial architecture and the World Bank and the IMF in particular.
It's interesting you asking this question. Whether it's the UN, whether it's the WTO, whether it's the World Bank, whether it's the IMF, we'll have to look at reforming themselves. The reform which we are talking about in countries are happening in different stages, but these institutions have remained the way they have been for the last several decades. Many of them now no longer speak for countries whose issues have remained unattended to for decades together. Whether it is on trade, whether it is on security, whether it is on monetary framework, and whether it is on funding development. There is a desperate need for all these institutions to be more transparent, represent and speak for countries which don't get adequate representation. And therefore, I would think that is something which has to happen immediately in all these bodies.
And what do you think would, and I understand the importance of more appropriate representation as you see it, but what would happen substantively differently in the way the IMF or World Bank functioned if there was the kind of more appropriate representation that you favor?
There would be more equitable distribution of resources, more equitable, more concern for equitable development for the growth. This whole dialogue, which used to happen north-south, looked as if it's moving towards irrelevance. But the issues of north-south still remain. Development has not reached many parts of Africa, many parts of the small Pacific Islands, many parts of those countries, even within countries where there is differentiated development. So I think that's what would have happened if only this reform agenda had been taken up by these institutions sometime.
Do you think India, I mean, there's a lot of discussion of what the role of an institution like the World Bank should be with respect to India. Some people feel that the World Bank should be doing much more for India, especially given the scale of the Indian population. Others feel that the really serious poverty problems in the world today lie in Africa and lie outside of India, and that a genuine egalitarian commitment would involve less concessional assistance for India than it has traditionally received. Would your emphasis be on more concessional assistance for countries like India or less concessional assistance for countries like India?
More concessional assistance for countries which need them. I'm not naming them.
Does India?
More concession for African countries. More concession, didn't I say for a minute ago? Ocean islands, small island economies, all of which need more assistance.
Even if that means reallocation from India?
Well, yes. I'll take the example of how climate change related adaptations have been funded by countries. India has achieved more than any other country the nationally determined commitments given in Paris COP21. We've submitted a report to say we've achieved almost 2/3 of it. Fund was from India itself. We have not taken anybody else's money. No multilateral assistance came to us, nor did we ask. So it's not as if we are asking for reform in multilateral institutions because we want more money. Vaccination, we've been giving countries for free in some of the bilateral arrangements. So where we can, we also chip in to help. We are not here to take all the resources of the multilateral institutions. Money should go where there is need for it.
Are there questions from the floor? Yes, sir.
It's an honor to have you here in Harvard among us. And my name is Saurabh Singh. I work with Reserve Bank of India as Assistant General Manager. And ma'am, I feel very proud when through concerted efforts of Ministry of Finance and through efforts of RBI, we are a global pioneer in financial inclusion and payment system. In fact, the kind of efforts we have seen in Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, 300+ million accounts were opened, and the real-time settlement is a case study for the entire world to follow. My question is, how are we going to push this frontier even further? When it comes to financial inclusion, we have to teach our people, we have to encourage them to use those accounts which were opened. And we have to work a lot in area of micro-insurance, micro-pension, just in a mission mode with it for bank accounts. So is there financial inclusion 2.0 that we are...
It's already happening.
As a legacy in a mission mode, ma'am, just like we did for bank account opening.
It's already happened. Even after the second wave, we've come up with a scheme to reach the farthest of the corners of India through microfinance institutions. And as regards digital adaptation, you're from the Reserve Bank, I don't need to tell you, India's poorest to the poor, irrespective of the level of literacy, we're the first ones to adopt pay through your phone, even during the pandemic. So there are lessons for us to learn from them, how readily they are willing to adapt to technology. And many of us even now scramble to see how best we can use the phones.
So go for insurance. And then my next question about the payment system.
Okay, one question to a customer. Thank you. In back, yes.
I was curious about, just a few days ago, we saw how in the state of Uttar Pradesh, 4 farmer protesters were killed by a cabinet colleague's son. And the son of your cabinet colleague is in jail right now because he killed 4 farmer protesters. I was wondering why there is no word about this from the Prime Minister, from many senior ministers, and why, when somebody asks questions about these things, why is it such a defensive reaction that when Amartya Sen says that there is intolerance, why is there no acknowledgement that these kinds of ghastly things are happening? And we just pretend, are we pretending to be asleep? Is that what's going on?
No, absolutely not. And it's nice of you to have picked up that one incident, which is absolutely condemnable. Every one of us say that. Equally, there are instances happening elsewhere, is my concern. India has issues of such nature happening in very many different parts of the country. Equally, I would like you and many others, inclusive of Dr. Amartya Sen, who all know India, to raise it at every time when it happens. Not just raise it when it suits us, because it's a state where BJP is in power, one of my cabinet colleagues' son is in probably trouble, and also assume that it's actually them who did it and not anybody else. Due course of justice will also have a complete inquiry process to establish it. And it's not being defensive about my party or my prime minister, it's being defensive about India. I will talk for India. I will talk for justice for the poor. I will not be mocked at. And if it is mocking, I will be defensive to stand up and say, sorry, let's talk on facts. That's my answer for you.
Hello, ma'am. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's truly a privilege to share the same space as you, and your talk makes me feel very hopeful. I am a physician from India, and before arriving at Harvard School of Public Health, I was working as a frontline worker for 12 months in the largest COVID hospital in Mumbai. My question to you is about the healthcare spending in India, and whether you think, I know that the most recent budget has increased for primary and preventive services, but do you think that it's enough for a country of 1 billion, more than 1 billion people? And how can we make this resource allocation more equitable?
You're right. India's population, India's size demands a lot more. And I would think at the stage at which we are in, what is more? How much is more? How much is sufficient? So we do a maximum best given the resource constraints. And we will commit ourselves to keep doing that every year for the next few years. So India's health has actually now received, and rightly, received the attention it so deserves. So during the pandemic and even after the second wave, we've committed more resources for health infrastructure. And you probably are aware in the last 1 year, or even prior to the COVID onslaught, we have increased the number of colleges which teach medicine, or expanded on the number of seats which are available in colleges which exist already. So we want to have more doctors, more paramedics trained in the country and certified. So not only are we looking at physical infrastructure, but are also looking at number of trained doctors who will be available for the country. So yes, we are doing all this at a stage where the pandemic has hit us, but we will continue to do it. We are committed to do it.
Let me ask you a question that was put by one of the people who has zoomed into this session. Questioner picked up on a remark I had made in introducing you, that you were the first full-time finance minister of India who was a woman. And the question was, what would your thoughts be for women who are interested in financial policy and economics coming out of that experience? And how do you see the gender issue in the context of remarkable careers like the one you've had?
I've heard of United States being the country, the land of opportunities. A lot of people say that, and probably it is. It was, and it continues to be. But I would say that of India now. It's actually a land of all possibilities, opportunities. And there were questions asked about women, work participation, and so on. First of all, data about the labor force in India has gone through quite a lot of changes. I don't think there was ever a time where we had complete understanding of, or complete numbers available of formal work participation, man or woman, and so similarly of informal sector. Women have always been there. The only grievance was they couldn't easily go up the ranks, in whichever sphere that you're talking about. Of late, I find that across the board being broken. Earlier, there used to be occasional rise of women in some positions. But even then, there would be women who were from the privileged sections or connected to family. But of late, you find that in every sphere of activity in India, women who are self-made are coming up and are reaching good positions. So I would think this is the best time to be in India and see women grow in their chosen field of work.
I'm going to take several questions and let the minister answer them as a group, and then I think we're getting near the end of our hour. 1, 2, 3.
India's latest participatory labor force survey indicates that 42.5% of people in 2018-19 were in agriculture, and that's now grown to 45.6%. People are basically going back from farms to factories. What do you think that says about the state of the economy and about, not viewing this in isolation after the pandemic, but the lack of job creation and the arresting growth trajectory for several years before the pandemic as well?
I think you meant from factories to farms, not from farms to factories. Yes, people going back from factories to farms. Yes.
Well, thank you, Minister, for being here with us. My name is Dhananjan, part of the Kennedy School. I guess given the topic and the fact that this is by the Rahmani Center, I'd like to talk about business and government. More specifically, I'd like to understand that as many of us will be graduating next year or in 2 years, and people like me would want to go back to India. On behalf of my colleagues and I wanted to understand what are some of the areas that you would be very bullish on, or let's say for entrepreneurs, what are some of the focus areas that you would like young students like me to think about, and then how would you recommend that students like me engage with the government to be able to work together and help the people in it?
Good afternoon, Madam as Minister. Thank you so much for the talk today. We're all, I think, very appreciative of your time and insights today. I'm Bhavya. I'm an MBA candidate at Kennedy School. One of the themes for today's talk is inclusive development, which is unthinkable without considering the interests of the Indian farmer. And my question is slightly broader than my colleagues in trying to understand what your views are on the current farmer crisis and what is the government's action plan to break the current impasse. Thank you.
Factory to farm. May have been the situation during Corona, because people were keen to get back to their families. They were not sure how they would handle themselves if afflicted by the pandemic, being alone in the place where they're working. So migrants went back, and then in districts where they went back, the government converged 16 different schemes, which were all rural development schemes, to make sure that in those 116 odd districts where large number of migrant workers returned, they were provided work. And many of them took those work up, and it wasn't an open-ended thing. We said you would take up and spend the money which was in the BE of 2020 budget before October 2020, because we wanted to have immediate prospects of work given to these migrants who were returning, and the convergence of those 16 schemes, which were otherwise broader rural development schemes, helped us to get that many resources on for the migrant workers. So that was one way in which we sustained them even as they came back from the factories where they were working. But even by November of last year, they've started returning. In fact, my telephone calls to various industries to find out, have all the workers come from the respective areas to where they went back? Many told me that most of them have come back, but some of the skilled people from among the migrant workers did not go back to the respective factories to which they belonged earlier. They've chosen to go back from there to newer areas, bargaining better wages. So these factory owners were not even upset about it. They said, that's fine, we'll start training newer people. but it is indicative of a certain shift that is happening in the labor force, which even trade unions couldn't have brought in, but a lot of workers have moved over to better prospects in their jobs. So the factory to farms was a feature of the pandemic year during the lockdown. Once the lockdown steadily was lifted, you find many of them going back. In fact, most of the workers, one of the indicators I'll use to prove it is the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, which is given in the rural areas with an assured 100 days work today. And that is a scheme which works on demand by the worker saying, give me the job. The demand has come down. People are going back to newer jobs or their earlier jobs. So that's the current position. Data might reveal it with a time lag. Entrepreneurs and businesses, what happens to those who are returning to the country? What are the prospects? I think the areas in which there's just a lot of traction is if you are an innovative business person, you can start a business. Even with small capital, there's enough money available given by the government through the banks, which leverage that corpus which we've given them and fund startups to come up. Startups have also expanded their areas of work. Now they're looking at agriculture, marketing of agricultural produce, as much as working for space, meaning satellite and related space technology related work, but they're also in a big way in fintech areas. So the opportunities for individuals who are coming back to India with or without capital in their hand are ever so many. And today the banks, commercial banks, are ready to come up with help for you to start your business. So areas I said were agriculture, post-harvest related activities, value addition in food products, also looking at technology-driven banking and insurance sector. These are some of the areas in which a lot of work is happening. Other than that, of course, you can have lateral entry into government bureaucratic setup. There are today a lot of joint secretary level officers who are being recruited laterally. They come in, they serve the government, and then go away after a certain number of years if they choose to get out of the government itself. So even that is available. Bhavya asked some question about inclusive development, about the farmer crisis, and as to how we are likely to solve the protests which are going on. The three acts which the government brought in, where each of them discussed by the various parliamentary committees over a decade. Some newer aspects may have been added, some tweaked finer. All the three acts have been discussed variously by the state governments, by the center after 2014, after BJP came into power. But this has been in the making for now a decade. Every stakeholder has been consulted. When the farm laws were brought in the Lok Sabha, there was an elaborate discussion, and the agriculture minister gave his reply as well. And in the Lok Sabha, our numbers may be big, but all parties are present in the Lok Sabha in varying numbers. It was only when it came to the Rajya Sabha, there was a lot of noise and disturbance. Okay, the acts were passed. The protests are happening. Protesters belonging to one or one and a half, in a sense, one state or some parts of another state, Punjab and Haryana, and some parts of Western Uttar Pradesh. Government has been saying that we are willing to talk with the protesters, has been engaging with them. And one point for all of you all here. We asked pointedly, what is that one aspect in any one of the three laws which have been passed to which you object? We are willing to talk about it. Tell us that one particular aspect in any one of the three laws. Till date, we have not had even one particular aspect which is being questioned. And therefore, the protesters are not sure on what score they are protesting. What is it that they're objecting? Then there's this issue about minimum support price to be given to farmers. The highest ever minimum support price, each crop, Kharif, Rabi, the two seasonal crops that are produced in India, agriculture season of Kharif, agriculture season of Rabi. Well in time, the MSPs are announced not for one wheat or not one rice. Wheat, rice, which is wheat, paddy, and probably another 12 different crops. Minimum support price is well in advance announced. Farmers could decide whether they want to grow that crop or not. They can otherwise choose to grow something else. And once they choose to grow any of these for which a minimum support price is announced and procurement is done, through direct benefit transfer using technology, money is deposited as a lump sum into their accounts. And the highest amount of procurement, the largest ever payment per farmer under the minimum support price, which is declared, has happened in the last 7 years after Prime Minister Modi has come. Highest ever. The number of farmers, the total quantum of money, total quantum of grain procured, in each one of them, the highest has happened season after season in the last 7 years. There are recorded conversations which you can see of farmers even from Punjab, even from Haryana, saying, I've got the entire amount into my account, and this is verifiable. It's not a claim which I'm making. You can go and check it out. Highest amount, and the entire amount is given into the account directly the day after procurement is done. No staggering, no delaying of it. So we have not been told what is it that they're protesting against as yet. And the minister is willing to talk even today.
If I may, Nirmala, thank you very, very much for having been with us. I know I speak for everyone in this room, and I speak for the larger group that is on Zoom when I say that we all feel better about our understanding of Indian perspectives on a wide range of questions because of the opportunity to be engaged in this conversation with you. We are honored as a university that you have been willing to take time from your immensely demanding schedule to visit with you. Many of us, I know, hope to have the opportunity to visit India and to see you and your colleagues in an appropriate way. And certainly fortified by your visit, we will all be watching not just the G20 and the developments of the next several days, but the ongoing story that is India's economic development going forward. Thank you very, very much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you very much.